I want to thank you guys for joining me today. So today we're going to talk about the Rodney King incident of 1991 and the riots that shortly ensued after the verdict in 1992. But before we get to that part, we want to talk about the foundation of things that I believe kind of led up to and allowed this to take place. And that primary focus is going to be on the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, or better known as the War on Drugs under Ronald Reagan. So one of the big things is it's granted a budget of $1.7 billion to law enforcement nationwide. And it also, the big kicker was, it implemented mandatory minimums for drug offenses. Two offenses that we'll focus on are going to be for crack cocaine and for powder cocaine. So the mandatory minimum for 5 grams of crack cocaine was set at 5 years. 5 grams, 5 years for crack cocaine. But for powder cocaine, it was 500 grams, got you 5 years. The reason that's significant is because crack cocaine was the drug of choice in the inner city. It was cheap and it was easily accessible, whereas powder cocaine was more of an expensive drug, and it was normally a drug of choice in suburban areas, more prominent, white prominent areas. So there is a discrepancy when it comes to sentencing. It's why does 5 grams of this drug give you 5 years? But the thing you need to make it, if you have to have 500 grams in order to get 5 years. So it seems like there was some disproportionate policing there. But the other piece that's important is that $1.7 billion, a large portion of that went to Los Angeles, and that aided in the growth of the LAPD police force, which also led to the over-policing in the inner cities. So we had an increase in drug offenses. We also had a natural increase in police-citizen interactions, which also then leads to an increase in police misconduct claims. So that kind of segues us into the Rodney King incident. So Rodney King was in a high-speed chase. He was finally stopped, and when he was stopped, he was pulled out of his vehicle, immediately tased, and while being tased, he was then beat by the officers with their batons. And so while this is happening, you have a man named George Holliday who just so happens to be in his apartment with his camera, and he hears something going on outside. He looks out his window and he sees these police officers beating this man. So he takes his video camera and he starts to record, just naturally starts to record. And unbeknownst to the officers, they believe they're doing something in secret, but not even knowing this is going to be one of the biggest rifts between the police force and the inner city community, or Black people as a whole, really nationally. So immediately the next day, George submits the video to KTLA, and by that evening, it is playing on the evening news. By the next day, a copy of that tape makes it to CNN, and by the evening the next day, it is national news. And this initiated the FBI to do an investigation, which then leads to the trial. The officers immediately get indicted by a grand jury, and now there's a hearing. And even with the hearing, the original judge who was going to oversee the hearing, he denied the defendant's appeal for a change of venue because they felt like there's too much publicity going on in Los Angeles. He doesn't think that his clients will get a fair trial in LA County, so he requests a change of venue outside of LA. He denies it. They send it to a court of appeal, and the California Court of Appeal approves the change of venue, and they move it to Simi Valley. So Simi Valley is known, at the time, were large supporters of law enforcement. It was a win for them to get this trial moved because the jury was predominantly white males, and again, that community was well known for supporting the police at the time. Even with all of the evidence before them, the jury found all 4 of them not guilty. Well, they found 3 of them not guilty, and they couldn't reach a verdict on the 4th one. So at 3:15 on April 29th, they come to decision and they acquit all the officers. By 5 p.m. on April 29th, the riots start. Burning buildings, everything is in chaos at this time. And so at this point, this takes me to one of my earliest core memories as a child. I remember seeing someone that I knew, a family member, on the news. You have the helicopter with, spotlight and the camera, and he's shining down, and I see this man that I recognize pushing his car down the street with 2 couches on the roof of his car because his car broke down, and he was trying to get those couches home. And I remember my mom exclaiming this person's name, saying, "Oh, that's that person." And that is one of my earliest core memories as a child. So these riots devastated the inner city community. South Central LA is where I'm from, and it devastated South Central LA. A lot of things shut down. There was curfews, the National Guard, the Marines, everybody came in. It was a state of emergency at the time. Eventually there's a retrial. The federal jury indicts them because obviously there was some civil rights violations that took place. And so Coons and Powell are charged while the other 2 are found not guilty. And so in the end, they only get 30 months in a prison camp at the time. Rodney King eventually receives, almost $4 million in damages. And so he gets to live a life again. But unfortunately at this time, everything you've gone through is public. It's kind of hard to escape. And one of the things you learn later, almost 20 years later, Rodney King dies. He drowns in his pool, and they report that, he had drugs and alcohol in his system. But it's one of those things that you have to think about. It's when you experience a traumatic situation, it's between you and whoever the offender is. It's easier for someone to get past it or to suppress it when it's in between 2 people or even a group of people, but it's easier to. But imagine if that offense took place and it was national news and it was constantly being talked about for years. Imagine being forced into martyrdom, not being prepared, not choosing it, but it being forced upon you. I couldn't imagine how that would make me feel, trying to get past an issue, a problem, something you're dealing with constantly. A lot of people fought this man. How do you have this kind of money and you still turn into drugs and you turn into alcohol? Imagine reliving a traumatic experience over and over and over again for years and years and years. That I would believe that would damage anybody's psyche to the point beyond repair. I definitely feel bad for Rodney and everything that he went through, because he didn't only get beat that one time. It had replayed and happened every single time he had to watch a video or hear about it. It ultimately destroyed him and led to his demise, and that's what I believe. Rodney King's situation was a terrible situation. It was, I believe, was a direct reflection of over-policing, which also was a direct reflection of the Anti-Drug Abuse Act. And when there are people who don't care about the people, there's going to be misconduct. And this was a direct reflection of that. So I thank you guys for listening to my opinion. And I look forward to spending time with you guys again on the next one. Peace.